primary purpose of government is to protect the opulent minority from the majority, Madison and his buddies worked very hard to ensure that this country's government would serve a small elite. Their plan for the rest of us was to keep us far away from being allowed to exercise any kind of meaningful decision-making authority over our lives. We the people was a phrase that sounded really good. The only problem was it didn't include very many people. It didn't include women, it didn't include Africans brought over as slaves, it didn't include Native people already here. It didn't include men without sufficient property. It didn't include 95% of us. We talk today about the 99% versus the 1%, but most people don't realize that this is how the system was designed to function. It's not something that happened recently. The elite didn't have to work very hard to get what they wanted out of government because they ran government. The elite didn't have to plead with business leaders to get business to listen to their needs because they were the business leaders. Activists today talk a lot about how large corporations have captured the regulatory agencies, have captured government. The only problem with this analysis is it's wrong. The people who run large corporations like Monsanto and Exxon and Halliburton and Burlington Northern, these folks run the regulatory agencies, and they already have. Always have. Corporate leaders were there at the table from the very beginning.
That might be the truth for me. No. Last movie I saw in the theater.
GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Whoa, whoa. GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Whoa, whoa.
GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho.
GMO has got to go.
GMO has got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho.
So if you're an anti-GMO activist, or an anti-RBGH activist, or an anti-factory farms activist, or a pro-raw milk activist, I'm here to tell you, the regulatory agencies that make decisions day in and day out about what kinds of agriculture we're going to have in this country, regulatory agencies like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, corporate leaders didn't have to capture these agencies to make them into servants of those corporations. They didn't have to capture them because these agencies were designed to serve the agriculture and food processing industries. They were designed by the very corporate leaders who they now supposedly regulate. The food regulations themselves were written by these same corporate leaders. What I'm telling you should be obvious to every food activist in the country, but it's not. And I'll tell you how I know this to be true. And this brings me back to whether the United States of America was designed as a truly democratic republic or not. Let me ask you a question. If you had grown up in a country run by a totalitarian government, a government that everybody knew was not interested in responding to the needs of its people, would you plead with government leaders? Would you lobby your elected officials? Of course not. Why not? Because the people of that country would know it was a waste of their time. The government of that totalitarian state didn't care what the people wanted. They had their own agenda. They served a very small sector of the population, and they didn't give a damn about what the majority wanted.
Working to globalize herbicides in the sea, breaking on our crossroads, falling under scrutiny. GMOs, we just say no, it's time to start a mutiny. Monsanto and FGMO, F-Roundup and F-Roundup.
So how would the people challenge a totalitarian government? They would try to build people power at a scale that would be difficult for the government to take on. And by people power, I do not mean tactics like merely protesting and rallying and pleading with and negotiating with and demanding and picketing of our so-called leaders. I do mean the kind of people power that attempts to seize back our authority as we the people, our authority to govern ourselves. I'm talking about the power that historic citizens movements used to drive new rights into law, like the abolitionists and the suffragists. Let's take a look at our current situation today in the United States. Very few hands went up when I asked if you believed you lived in a democratic society. And yet look at the kinds of activism that most of us are doing in the anti-GMO movement. We're pleading with our elected officials to stop the tremendous damage being done to our environment and to people's health by these out-of-control agriculture and food processing companies. We're attending USDA and FDA regulatory hearings. We're writing letters to these agencies, begging them to not allow the latest GMO outrage. We're signing petition after petition. In other words, we are playing a game that was created by agriculture corporations, the regulatory game. They designed the playing field. They decided where to put the goalposts. They decided the rules of the game. And then they invited us to play. And we keep playing their game on their field, year in and year out.
Are we gonna let Monsanto wreak havoc on our farms, in our fields, in our gardens in Cascadia? No! Do you want heirloom seeds? Yeah! Do you want to see Monsanto kicked out of the Northwest? Yeah!
Why do we do this? Because we still somehow assume that we live in a democratic society, where the institutions of government are there to serve us, so we just need to work a little harder to get their attention. I'm here to tell you these institutions of government are not here to serve us, and they never were.
Say yes to healthy kids.
Say no to Roundup in our food.
Regulatory agencies were created way back in the 1880s. They were created specifically to funnel citizen participation into a narrower and narrower space, where we the people ended up with no real voice. The system is working, folks. It's not broken at all. It's working just as it was designed. The USDA and the FDA are working as they were designed, day in and day out, shielding agriculture and food processing corporations from our rage.
GMOs have got to go, hey, hey!
the sooner we realize that this entire structure of law, regulatory law, was put there to tie we the people in knots, to make our voices irrelevant, the sooner we will shift gears and then start doing a very different kind of activism. A kind of activism where we the people seize back our authority to govern ourselves.